On November 27, 2024, a seismic shift occurred in the Syrian landscape. A coalition of opposition forces united under the banner of Operation Deterrence of Aggression launched a massive offensive against the entrenched regime of Bashar al Assad. This marked a turning point in the protracted Syrian conflict, a conflict that had ravaged the nation for over a decade, leaving a trail of unimaginable destruction and despair in its wake. Led by the formidable Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS, this coalition represented a diverse array of groups, each with their own motivations and ideologies. Yet, they found common ground in their unwavering determination to oust Assad and end his iron-fisted rule. The offensive, swift and decisive, took the regime by surprise. Cities that had long been considered strongholds of Assad's power began to crumble under the relentless pressure of the opposition advance. Aleppo, Syria's second-largest city and once a bustling economic hub, fell swiftly into the hands of the opposition. This victory sent shockwaves through the regime's ranks, exposing the fragility of their grip on power. The momentum continued to build, with each passing day bringing news of further advances by the opposition. Hama, Homs, Daraa, names that had become synonymous with the brutality of the Assad regime, were liberated one by one. The tide had turned and the once unthinkable now seemed inevitable: the fall of Bashar al Assad. The Syrian people, who had endured years of unimaginable suffering under Assad's oppressive regime, dared to believe that change was finally at hand. For too long, they had been denied their basic rights and freedoms. Their voices had been silenced by fear and intimidation, their lives held hostage by a dictator who seemed impervious to their pain. The sight of opposition forces advancing on Damascus, the seat of Assad's power, ignited a spark of hope in the hearts of ordinary Syrians. They had watched in horror as their country was torn apart by war, their cities reduced to rubble, their families shattered by violence and displacement. The regime's brutal crackdown on peaceful protests in 2011 had plunged Syria into a spiral of violence from which there seemed to be no escape. The international community, divided and seemingly paralyzed by inertia, had failed to protect the Syrian people from the predations of their own government. The Syrian economy, once a beacon of relative prosperity in the region, had been driven to the brink of collapse by years of conflict and mismanagement. International sanctions, imposed in response to the regime's human rights abuses, had taken a heavy toll. The Syrian pound, once a symbol of national pride, had plummeted in value, wiping out the savings of ordinary citizens and pushing millions into poverty. Basic necessities such as food, fuel and medicine had become scarce and prohibitively expensive. Reports emerged of the regime's increasing reliance on illicit activities, such as the production and trafficking of Captagon, a highly addictive amphetamine, to fund its war efforts and enrich a select few. The economic hardship faced by ordinary Syrians stood in stark contrast to the opulent lifestyles enjoyed by Assad and his inner circle. As the opposition advanced on Damascus, cracks began to appear in the once formidable edifice of Assad's regime. The Syrian army, once renowned for its discipline and loyalty, found itself stretched thin and demoralized. Years of fighting a brutal and unwinnable war had taken their toll. Defections, once a trickle, became a steady stream as soldiers, weary of war and disillusioned with the regime they had sworn to serve, abandoned their posts and joined the opposition. The regime's propaganda machine, which had for so long controlled the narrative within Syria, struggled to maintain its grip on the flow of information. The internet and social media, though heavily censored, provided glimpses of the truth, exposing the regime's lies and atrocities to the world. The Syrian people, no longer willing to be passive victims of their own government, took to the streets in a spontaneous outpouring of anger and frustration. Section 5. The Price of War. The Syrian army, once a formidable force in the region, had been severely weakened by years of attrition and the loss of experienced personnel. The once reliable support from its allies, Russia and Iran, had waned considerably. Russia's preoccupation with its ongoing war in Ukraine had forced it to scale back its military presence in Syria. Iran, grappling with its own internal challenges and facing increasing pressure from Israel, had also reduced its support for the Assad regime. The Syrian army, deprived of its external backers, found itself outmatched and outgunned by the advancing opposition forces. Section 6. Damascus falls, silent. On December 8, 2024, a date etched in the annals of Syrian history, opposition forces entered Damascus, meeting with little resistance. The streets of the capital, once teeming with life, were eerily deserted. The Assad regime, once seemingly invincible, had vanished into thin air. The whereabouts of Bashar al Assad himself remained a mystery, with conflicting reports emerging about his fate. Some sources claimed that he had fled the country seeking refuge in a foreign land. Others whispered that he was hiding, biding his time for a possible counterattack. The fate of his inner circle, the architects of his brutal regime, was equally uncertain. As the dust settled on the smoldering ruins of Assad's rule, the Syrian people were left to contemplate the uncertain future that lay ahead. Section 7. A New Dawn. The fall of the Assad regime was met with a mixture of jubilation and trepidation. In cities and towns across Syria, people poured into the streets, their faces a mixture of joy and disbelief. The nightmare was finally over. For the first time in over a decade, they could breathe the air of freedom. But amidst the celebrations, there was also a sense of uncertainty. The war had left Syria deeply scarred, its social fabric torn apart, its economy in ruins. The road ahead would be long and arduous. The task of rebuilding their shattered lives and forging a new future for their country would be a daunting one. The international community, which had been largely absent during Syria's darkest hour, now had a moral obligation to assist in the country's reconstruction. Section 8. The Long Road Ahead. The future of Syria remained shrouded in uncertainty. The opposition, though united in their goal of ousting Assad, was a fractious coalition with differing visions for the country's future. The specter of sectarian violence, which had haunted Syria throughout its long history, loomed large. The challenge facing the Syrian people was not merely one of rebuilding their shattered infrastructure, but also of healing the deep wounds that had been inflicted on their society. The international community, which had for so long been paralyzed by division and inaction, had a responsibility to support the Syrian people in their quest for peace, justice, and reconciliation. Section 9. A Tapestry of Hope and Uncertainty. The fall of Bashar al Assad marked the end of an era in Syrian history, a chapter written in blood and tears. As the country emerged from the ashes of war, it faced a future fraught with both challenges and opportunities. The long and arduous process of rebuilding a shattered nation would require courage, determination, and an unwavering commitment to peace and reconciliation. The world watched with bated breath, hoping that Syria, once a symbol of suffering and despair, could rise again as a beacon of hope and resilience. The Syrian people, who had endured so much, deserved nothing less.